I stared at him, my heart racing as he set his glass down and turned back to look at me. This time, his gaze was more determined, more intense. "Cassandra," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion, unable to hide it. I noticed my breath quicken, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, Ezra," I whispered, my voice barely audible, as if it couldn't control itself anymore. Matthias reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against mine. The warmth of his touch sent a surge of emotion through me. I knew I shouldn't say this, but he started, "When I look at you, I just can't stop. You're not just incredibly beautiful, you're more than that." I never realized I had truly lived until I turned 68. I wonder, Jonah, my late husband, what was it that held me back all those years? What did I have taken from me? These questions gnawed at me, feeling both like a reprimand and an awakening. Matthias said nothing, but his gaze spoke volumes, giving me the courage I hadn't known I had. He didn't support me with his hands, but with his eyes. As my fingers slowly grasped the strap and pulled it down, I didn't see him there, just a story unfolding between us. Let me start over so you can understand the full picture of how all of this came to be. I was 68, and honestly, I never imagined that something as simple as tidying up would lead to this, all thanks to my kind-hearted neighbor. It had been 12 years since Jonah, my late husband, passed away, and I had lived in solitude, feeling the weight of widowhood pressing on me for far too long. But tonight, as the night began to fade and dawn approached, I made a decision to face something I had avoided for years, cleaning out the basement. It was a place I had always tried to forget, the cluttered corner of the house that, just the thought of it, made my chest tighten. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to face it. The room was filled with dust, musty smells, and old boxes holding the memories of a lifetime. The first box I opened revealed something I never expected, an old photo album from my youth. As I flipped through the pages, one photo caught my attention. It was from a beach party, where I held a margarita in one hand, wearing a bright orange bikini, laughing as if nothing in the world could trouble me. The picture reflected a young, carefree Cassandra, untethered and unburdened by anything. Looking at the photo, a mixture of warmth and sorrow stirred inside me. It brought back memories long buried, desires I had suppressed, emotions I had kept hidden for years. But just as I was sinking into these thoughts, a sound from the basement door startled me. I turned quickly. Standing there was Matthias, my neighbor, whom I hadn't seen in 4 years. He looked older, more mature, yet his smile was still familiar. He stepped closer, and I found myself frozen in surprise and quiet joy at his sudden presence. "Matthias, when did you get here?" I asked, my voice trembling with both shock and relief. "I saw your car outside," he replied, his eyes now intense. "I thought you might need some help." I almost told him no, but before I could speak, he moved closer, his gaze landing on the album in my hands. "What's this?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly pulled the photo away from his reach, but it was too late. His eyes were locked onto the photo of me, the young Cassandra at the beach. His gaze was intense, as though he was seeing something timeless, something he couldn't tear his eyes away from. "Is this you?" he asked, voice filled with surprise. I let out a nervous laugh. "Yes, that's me, from my wilder days." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from admiration to something else, something deeper, more complicated. "Wow, just thinking about you like this is strange, but impressive," he said with a smile, the heat in his eyes undeniable. His words hit me like an electric shock, stirring up emotions I had buried for so long. Desires, cravings, things I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years, came rushing to the surface in an instant. "We shouldn't stop here," Matthias said, his voice different now, stronger, more certain. "Let's see a little more." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to shut everything down, to keep the peace, but another part of me urged me to keep going. I wasn't sure where this would lead, where his words, his gaze, and that photo would take me, but I knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The storm within me had just begun, and I couldn't stop it now. I hesitated for a moment. Not all the photos in that album were innocent. Among the carefree beach snapshots, there were some taken in Boulder that captured a wilder side of my youth. But seeing Matthias so captivated, the admiration in his eyes, I couldn't resist. "All right," I said, offering a small, slightly nervous smile. "But some of these photos might be a bit much." Matthias chuckled, nodding. "I'm sure they're all amazing," he replied, settling next to me and placing the album on his lap. His breath was close enough to brush against my skin as we flipped through the pages. The images of beach parties made way for candid shots from my college days, the wild nights at the club. One photo showed me in a red, form-fitting dress, dancing with abandon. Matthias lingered on that photo, staring at it for a beat too long. "Is this really you?" he asked, his eyes flickering between the photo and me, his face lighting up with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Yes," I answered, a little embarrassed. "That was just youth. Things were different back then." Matthias fell silent for a moment before speaking again, his voice softer. "You are incredible," he said, then paused. "All this time, I've always thought of you as my grandmother, but you look like a party girl in this picture." I didn't expect that. His words made me blush, but there was something else, too, something stirring deep inside me. I thought about how Jonah had never shown me that kind of admiration, not even when I was young. He had always been distant, cold, and strict, but Matthias was different. The look in his eyes spoke volumes, more than his words ever could. As we continued turning the pages, the photos became bolder. There was one of me laughing with friends, wearing short shorts and a bikini top, another of me dancing in a revealing black dress at the club. Each image felt like a glimpse into a past that was coming alive once again, stirred by Matthias's gaze, each one pulling me further away from the person I had become, back into the woman I once was. Matthias smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that flickered like a spark in the dark. His voice, deep and smooth, carried a weight that sent a shiver down my spine. "It's an honor to witness all of this. Even when you were young, your beauty was breathtaking. Jonah is truly a lucky man." His words struck something deep within me, a place both tender and unfamiliar. My heart warmed, but beneath that warmth was a strange, electric pull. Matthias's gaze lingered on me, unwavering, as if peeling back layers I had so carefully constructed. The more I felt his attention, the more undeniable the magnetic tension between us became. He was everything I once dreamed of in my youth, confident, daring, unapologetically admiring, and unafraid to uncover the hidden parts of me I had long since buried. As we turned the final page of the album, Matthias closed it gently, yet his eyes remained fixed on me. "Cassandra," he said softly, his voice carrying an intimacy that left me breathless, "you are truly extraordinary." I froze, caught off guard by the sincerity in his words. It had been years, decades, even, since anyone had looked at me like that, let alone spoken to me in such a way. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the air between us grew heavy, charged with something unspoken. In the cold, dusty confines of the basement, it felt as if an ember had sparked to life within me. Matthias's presence made me feel alive, youthful, and yet vulnerable. I didn't know where these feelings would take me, but I couldn't deny the fire he had ignited. He turned toward me fully, his admiration still shining in his gaze. "Cassandra," he murmured again, his voice steady and utterly sincere. "After seeing all those photographs, I have to say, time hasn't touched you. You haven't aged a day. You still look as radiant and beautiful as ever." The compliment hit me like a thunderclap. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse quickened, and warmth spread across my cheeks. Even in my youth, I wasn't accustomed to hearing such words, especially not from Jonah. "Thank you, Matthias," I said, my voice faltering slightly, betraying the emotions surging within me. I tried to steady myself, to keep the truth of time from overwhelming me. But then I paused, drawing in a deep breath, and something within me stirred, a courage I hadn't felt in years. "Maybe I have aged," I said, my voice low but resolute, "but I've never lost touch with my desires. I've never stopped longing, and I've never stopped dreaming." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. Matthias's gaze didn't waver. Instead, it deepened, his expression a mix of admiration and something more profound, something that felt dangerously close to a promise. Matthias's smile was deliberate, almost predatory, as his electric blue eyes locked onto mine. It was more than a look, it was a claim. I could feel the unspoken words lingering in the space between us. He wasn't just calling me beautiful. No, his gaze said so much more. It told me I was mesmerizing, captivating, utterly intoxicating. My breath caught as my traitorous eyes drifted over him. His tall, commanding presence, the broad shoulders that seemed to challenge the very air around him, and the unruly waves of his golden hair, it was a combination that could render anyone speechless. But it wasn't his appearance alone that left me disarmed. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence in his expression, paired with a gentleness in those piercing blue eyes. "It's unusual to hear something like that from someone like you," I managed to say, my voice quieter than I intended. A weak smile flickered on my lips, a poor defense against the energy crackling between us. I forced myself to add, "Jonah's never been like you. He's steady, calm, but distant. He's never surprised me, never thrilled me. He's a good man, but not the man you've been longing for," Matthias finished smoothly, his voice deep, with just enough edge to send a shiver down my spine. I should have looked away. I should have ended this conversation. But I couldn't. The air between us felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. "No," I admitted, my words raw with honesty. "Jonah has never been what I truly needed. There's always been something missing." Matthias tilted his head, his lips curving into a smile that was as knowing as it was dangerous. "Maybe the important thing," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "is that you've realized it. And maybe now's the time to find out what, or who, can fill that void." His words hit me like a lightning bolt, igniting something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. A thrill. A reckless hunger that I had long since buried under the weight of responsibility and time. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. Matthias wasn't just different from Jonah, he was the embodiment of every dream I had dared to dream in my youth. But where could this lead me? And did I even care? Matthias stood abruptly, his movements fluid and confident. He slid his hands into his pockets, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm going to put the bike in the garage," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Wait for me in the living room, Cassandra." "Not here." His tone left no room for argument, and the sheer authority in his voice sent a tremor through me. I nodded, almost reflexively. "All right, Matthias," I murmured, barely recognizing my own voice. As he ascended the stairs, with a purposeful stride, I was left staring after him, my mind spinning. Even his love for his motorcycle, the passion with which he spoke about it, seemed to fuel this unrelenting attraction. I could almost see him, sleeves rolled up, hands expertly working on the engine, every movement radiating energy and purpose. "He's exactly the kind of man I used to dream of," I whispered to myself. But then, the reality of it all struck me like a sharp gust of wind. He's my step-nephew. And yet, he was affecting me in ways I couldn't control. I moved to the living room, my emotions a storm of longing and confusion. Minutes later, Matthias returned, carrying a bottle of wine. The moment my eyes caught the label, my heart skipped a beat. "Rose. My favorite." "How did you know?" I asked, barely able to mask the tremor in my voice. He shrugged casually, a smirk playing on his lips. "I notice things," he said simply. "Even when I was younger." I remembered. His words hit me harder than they should have. How long had it been since someone paid such careful attention to me, to the little details that made me who I was? "This wine is special," I said softly, my voice trembling with emotion. "It's incredibly thoughtful." "Thank you, Matthias." He opened the bottle with practiced ease, poured the wine into 2 glasses, and handed one to me. "Let's drink to beautiful memories tonight, Cassandra," he said, his voice low and deliberate, laced with a meaning that sent my heart racing. I raised my glass, clinking it gently against his. As the first sip of rose touched my lips, its familiar flavor danced across my tongue, awakening something in me I thought was long gone. But what left me breathless wasn't the wine, it was Matthias. His gaze burned into me, unrelenting, unapologetic. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a harmless flirtation. It was a spark threatening to become a wildfire. Matthias stopped abruptly, his glass clinking softly against the table as he set it down with purpose. When he turned to me, the air in the room shifted. His eyes, those piercing, unrelenting blue eyes, burned with a hunger that made my breath hitch. "Cassandra," he said, his voice low, rough, trembling with emotions he couldn't hide. The sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver racing down my spine. My breathing quickened, shallow and uneven, as if my body already knew the storm that was coming. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out all rational thought. "Yes, Matthias," I whispered, though the words felt foreign, like they weren't mine. My voice trembled, barely audible, but in that moment, I didn't care. He stepped closer, and the space between us dissolved. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, until his fingers brushed against mine. The touch was electric, barely there, yet powerful enough to ignite something primal inside me. "I shouldn't say this," he began, his voice raw, like he was fighting against every wall he'd built to keep these words inside. "But when I look at you, I can't stop. You're not just beautiful, Cassandra. You're mesmerizing. You're everything I've ever wanted, everything I've never let myself dream of." His words hit me like a lightning strike, charging the air around us. My cheeks flushed hot, and I felt the unmistakable pull of his gravity, as though I was powerless to do anything but fall deeper. "Matthias, this is," I started, but the words crumbled before they could take form. He hesitated, his jaw tightening as though wrestling with himself. Then, in a single, decisive moment, he leaned in. The air between us seemed to explode, every nerve in my body screaming to life as his presence consumed me. I should have stopped him. I should have stepped back, broken the magnetic pull. But I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it wasn't gentle, it was everything I'd been denying myself. His kiss was a storm, passionate, desperate, and unrelenting. It demanded everything, pulling me into a whirlwind where time ceased to exist. The world around us vanished, swallowed by the intensity of the moment. His hand slid up, fingers grazing the side of my neck, holding me there as if he was afraid I might disappear. I felt myself give in, every defense shattering under the weight of him. This wasn't just a kiss, it was an unspoken confession, a surrender, and a dare, all wrapped into one. When we finally broke apart, the silence was deafening. His breath mingled with mine, his forehead resting against me, and the intensity in his eyes left me trembling. "Cassandra," he murmured, his voice shaking, "you undo me." And in that moment, I realized I was already undone. Desire, raw and unrelenting, surged through me like a tidal wave, breaking free of the chains I'd kept it under for years. Matthias' strong hands slid down to my waist, his touch both grounding and electrifying. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself completely surrender to the moment. When his lips finally parted from mine, the tension between us hung thick in the air, like a storm waiting to unleash itself. My heart thundered wildly, its erratic rhythm a mirror of the chaos within me. I looked up at him, hoping my eyes could convey what words could not, but language seemed futile in the face of such raw emotion. And then, driven by an undeniable urge I could no longer ignore, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. This time, I kissed him, my lips finding his with a hunger that surprised even me. The second our mouths met, something inside me ignited, a spark that roared into a full blaze. Matthias hesitated for only a fraction of a second before responding, his hands tightening on my waist. The kiss deepened, growing more fervent as his fingers pressed into me, pulling me closer. The warmth of him seemed to seep into every part of me, chasing away years of restraint and hesitation. As we sank back onto the couch, our bodies pressed together with no space left between us, his presence consumed me. His breath mingled with mine, his touch overwhelming every sense. Lying there against him, I felt a restlessness stir within me, a fierce, undeniable longing to finally let go. My heartbeat quickened, not with fear or doubt, but with a bold, burning desire to embrace this moment fully. Slowly, I sat up, aware of Matthias watching me intently. His gaze was steady and penetrating, as though he could see every flicker of emotion inside me without a single word exchanged. As I stood, a heady mixture of nervousness and daring coursed through me. My heart raced as I allowed the reckless impulse to take over. My hands moved to the delicate straps of my dress, the thin fabric suddenly feeling like chains I was desperate to break free of. Matthias said nothing. He didn't need to. The intensity of his eyes alone seemed to anchor me, giving me a courage I hadn't realized I possessed. He held me not with his hands, but with the unwavering force of his gaze. Fingers trembling but resolute, I took hold of the straps and, with deliberate slowness, began to slide them down. I had never truly lived until now. I couldn't help but wonder, what had David done to restrain me all these years? What had I denied myself for so long? The question inside me felt like a quiet rebellion, a long overdue awakening. Matthias, still catching his breath, ran a hand through his hair. It was clear he had been as affected by our moment as I had been. Somehow, seeing him like this, still rattled, gave me a strange sense of comfort. He smiled faintly, fixing his tousled hair, and in a soft voice, he told me he was going to take a shower. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of something in his eyes, a tenderness in his tone, and an unspoken determination beneath it all. It made everything feel suddenly real. The weight of it all settled into my bones, and as he walked away, I was left standing there, my mind still tangled in what had just happened. It was a bittersweet joy, this discovery of myself, too late in life, but more vivid than anything I had ever known.